The repair station had always been a quiet place. It stood alone on the edge of a dusty trade route, far from the busy lanes where large ships passed. Most days, the mechanic worked alone, fixing old engines, tightening loose bolts, and keeping abandoned machines alive for just a little longer. He enjoyed the silence. He liked the low humming of tools and the steady rhythm of his work. It kept his mind calm. But that day, something broke the silence. While he was sorting metal scraps behind the workshop, he heard a soft, strange sound. It was not the usual clanking of loose metal or the hiss of leaking gas. It sounded like a tiny cry, thin and shaky, almost like a whisper trying to be brave. The mechanic straightened up and looked around, wondering if his ears were playing tricks on him. The sound came again, this time a little clearer. It was coming from behind a large pile of scrap parts stacked near the old storage shed. He walked toward the noise, moving slowly so he wouldn't scare whatever was hiding there. The scrap pile was dark and messy, filled with broken panels, tangled wires, and pieces of metal that had not been touched in months. When he pushed aside a large metal sheet, the sound stopped completely. The silence felt heavy, like the whole place was holding its breath. He crouched down and gently pushed away more pieces. That was when he saw it. A tiny creature lay curled between two rusted panels. At first, he thought it was just a strange animal that had wandered in by accident. But as he looked closer, he realized it was not from this world, at least not from any world he knew well. It looked like a small alien wolf, but its body was far smaller than what he had ever seen in old reports and travel logs. Its fur was thin and dusty, its breathing shallow. The creature trembled as if it was cold or scared, maybe both. The mechanic froze for a moment. He had heard about alien wolf species before. People said they were powerful, fast, and extremely territorial. Even though this one looked tiny and weak, its kind had a reputation. He knew he should be careful. But then the creature opened its eyes. They were large, bright, and filled with a kind of fear that no dangerous animal would normally show. It looked up at him with a desperate expression, as if it was hoping for help, but didn't know if it should trust him. The mechanic felt something shift inside him. It no longer looked like a threat. It looked like something trying very hard just to stay alive. He slowly reached out his hand, keeping it low and steady so he wouldn't frighten the creature. For a moment, it tried to back away, but its body was too weak. It let out a tiny sound, almost like a plea. The mechanic could see now that the little wolf had injuries along its side, small scratches and bruises, as if it had been struggling for a long time. Its limbs looked shorter than normal, as if they had never grown properly. He realized the creature was suffering from extreme dwarfism. That explained its size, its weakness, and perhaps why it was all alone. He wondered how long it had been hiding among the scrap, trying to survive on its own. Judging by its condition, not very long, because it wouldn't have lasted much longer. The mechanic sighed softly. He knew what he was about to do would change his quiet life. But he also knew he couldn't leave the little creature here to suffer. It didn't matter what species it belonged to. Right now, it needed help. Easy, he whispered, even though he knew the creature couldn't understand his words. His voice was calm, gentle, the same tone he used when calming down scared customers who brought in broken machines. He took off his work gloves and slowly placed his hands around the tiny wolf. Its fur felt rough and cold. The creature tensed up, expecting harm, but when nothing painful happened, it relaxed just a little. Its breathing eased, though it still looked frightened. Lifting it carefully, he carried it inside the workshop. The warmth of the room made the creature blink in surprise. He laid it on a small work table covered with soft cloth, normally used for delicate parts. The creature tried to stand, but its legs gave out instantly. The mechanic gently kept it steady so it wouldn't fall. He moved quickly but calmly, gathering basic supplies, clean water, a soft cloth, and some homemade patches he often used for minor injuries. He wasn't a doctor, but years of repairing machines had taught him precision and patience. He wiped the dirt off the creature, checking its wounds carefully. Most were small scratches, nothing too deep, but the creature was so weak that even simple injuries had pushed it close to collapse. The creature watched him the entire time. Its eyes were tired, but seemed to hold a question. Why was he helping? He didn't answer out loud. He simply continued working with careful hands. He warmed a little bowl of water and placed it near the creature's mouth. At first, it didn't react. Then, after a moment, it sniffed the water and slowly took a sip. That was the first sign that the creature had any strength left. The mechanic felt a small wave of relief. He found a small heat lamp and positioned it over the creature, giving it a comfortable warmth. Slowly, the creature stopped shivering. Its breathing steadied. Its tail, short and thin, twitched slightly as if showing gratitude. The mechanic pulled up a stool and sat beside the table, watching the little wolf for a while. He didn't know if it would make it through the night. He didn't know how long it had been suffering or what had happened before he found it. But he knew one thing clearly. He had made the right choice by bringing it inside Dot as the hours passed. He continued checking on it, making sure it was warm and safe. Every time he moved, the creature's eyes followed him. It seemed scared to be alone, even for a moment. So he kept talking to it in a quiet voice, explaining what he was doing, even though the creature couldn't truly understand. Somehow, the sound of his voice seemed to calm it. Later in the night, the creature let out a soft sound that wasn't fear anymore. It was more like a tired sigh, the kind someone gives when they finally feel safe. The mechanic smiled a little. He wasn't used to having company in his workshop, but this tiny creature made the space feel strangely alive. Hours turned into the early morning. The creature was sleeping now, curled in a small ball under the warm light. Its breathing was still fragile, but steady. The mechanic stayed awake beside it, not wanting to leave it alone after everything it had been through. When the first morning light entered the workshop, the creature opened its eyes again. This time, they were not just filled with fear. There was a hint of curiosity, a spark of something new, maybe hope. The mechanic knew the creature didn't trust him fully yet, but it was no longer terrified. It looked at him with a silent question, almost as if asking what would happen next. He didn't know the answer. He didn't know what he had gotten himself into. But he knew he wasn't going to turn away from it. That tiny creature had arrived in his life like a quiet spark in the dark. And though he didn't realize it yet, this simple rescue would change everything that came after. The little alien wolf had survived the night, but it was far from fully recovered. Its body was fragile, trembling with every small movement. The mechanic watched it carefully as he prepared a small space for it to stay comfortably in the workshop. He gathered soft rags, old blankets, and even some small boxes to make a tiny shelter that would keep it safe from drafts and from accidentally getting hurt. He placed the creature gently inside the little enclosure. The wolf tried to move, but its legs wobbled, unable to support its weight. The mechanic knelt beside it and softly stroked its thin fur, careful not to frighten it. His fingers traced over small cuts and bruises. They were shallow, nothing too serious, but enough to make him worry. He murmured words of reassurance, even though he knew it couldn't understand them. For hours, he worked carefully to clean and dress the wounds. He used soft cloth to wipe away dirt and disinfected small scratches with a homemade solution. The alien wolf watched every move, eyes wide and alert. Its tail twitched slightly with every touch, showing it was becoming less afraid. Slowly, it allowed him to touch the parts of its body that had been painful. Each small reaction told him that it was starting to trust him, The mechanic knew he had to feed it, but he had nothing specifically made for alien species. He improvised, mixing soft, easy-to-digest ingredients he thought might work. He placed a tiny portion in a shallow dish. At first, the wolf just sniffed, unsure if it was safe to eat. The mechanic stayed still, giving it time. After a few moments, it took a small bite. Then another. Finally, it ate steadily, though carefully, as if afraid to finish too quickly. While the wolf ate, the mechanic cleaned up his workspace. The room had always been cluttered with tools, engine parts, and scrap metal, but now he noticed how different it felt with the tiny creature in it. There was a kind of tension, but also warmth. He felt responsible in a way he had never felt before. This little life depended entirely on him. The day passed slowly. The mechanic kept a close eye on the alien wolf, making sure it stayed comfortable. He noticed how delicate its breathing was, and how easily it got tired. Every time it tried to stand, it collapsed back onto the soft blankets. He realized that its dwarfism had not only stunted its growth, but also weakened its muscles. It couldn't move like a normal wolf, and simple tasks that would be easy for its species were exhausting Dot as the sun moved across the sky. The mechanic began thinking about what had brought this little creature to him. He wondered if it had been abandoned, or if it had been injured while trying to escape something. Its fur was dirty, matted in places, and small scratches covered its body. Yet there was something determined in its eyes, a spark of life that refused to fade. That spark reminded him why he couldn't give up on it. Dot in the afternoon, he tried to encourage the wolf to move a little. He placed small treats a short distance away to tempt it. At first, it made weak attempts, but quickly collapsed. He watched patiently, understanding that recovery would take time. He sat beside it, talking softly, telling it was safe now, and that it didn't have to be afraid. Slowly, the wolf lifted its head, sniffing the air, and even nuzzled his hand. That small gesture made him smile. It was a sign of trust, a sign that they were beginning to connect. Dot as evening came. The mechanic realized he needed to prepare for the night. He set up a gentle heat source to keep the wolf warm, making sure it wouldn't overheat. He also placed small dishes of water and food nearby so the creature could eat and drink without needing to move too much. It was clear that in its current state, even simple things like standing or walking were a struggle. He spent hours just observing it. The little wolf had begun to move around the small enclosure slightly, testing its legs and trying to balance. Each attempt was careful, tentative, but he could see improvement. He was amazed by its determination. Despite being weak, it refused to give up. Every small movement it made seemed like a victory. The mechanic thought about what its life must have been like before he found it. A tiny creature in a dangerous universe, surviving alone, weak, and constantly at risk. He realized how lucky it had been to stumble across his workshop. But luck alone wasn't enough. It needed care, attention, and patience, all of which he was determined to give. He knew he couldn't leave the wolf unattended again. The workshop, though quiet and peaceful, had sharp tools, heavy equipment, and scattered metal pieces that could easily injure it. So he created a safer environment. He removed anything that could harm it, cleared space around the enclosure, and even patted the floor with soft cloths. Every precaution mattered. Every detail mattered. By late evening, the little wolf was resting. Its breathing was steadier, and its eyes closed with a sense of security it hadn't had before. The mechanic sat nearby, watching, ready to intervene if it needed him. There was a quiet bond forming between them, subtle and slow, but undeniable. He began imagining what life could be like if the wolf continued to recover. Could it eventually walk properly? Could it be more active? Could it even play or respond to his actions like a normal companion? The questions were many, and the answers uncertain. But he felt a quiet hope. Hope that this fragile creature could become something more than what fate had handed it. Night fell completely, and the workshop was filled with a soft, calm glow from the heat lamp. The mechanic leaned back in his chair and watched the wolf sleep. He thought about the road ahead, about the patience it would require, and about the responsibility he now carried. Every decision mattered. Every small action could help it survive or harm it. But as he observed it, he realized something important. The wolf was not just a fragile animal. There was intelligence in its eyes, a sense of awareness, and even a curiosity about the world around it. It studied him, sometimes tilting its head as if trying to understand him, and he found himself responding to it in kind. A silent communication was forming, subtle but real. The mechanic reflected on his own life. He had spent years working alone, repairing engines, solving mechanical problems, and living quietly. He had never thought much about companions or responsibilities beyond his own survival. Yet here was this tiny creature, teaching him patience, care, and the value of compassion in ways he had never known. As the night deepened, he decided he would stay awake for a while longer. He didn't want the little wolf to feel alone. The workshop was usually quiet and empty, but now it felt alive. He watched it breathe, small and fragile, and realized that even the tiniest lives could hold incredible importance. Hours passed in quiet observation. The wolf shifted occasionally, twitching its ears and paws as it adjusted its position. The mechanic stayed alert, noting every movement, every reaction, knowing that these small details could mean the difference between life and death. He cleaned up minor spills, adjusted the blankets, and ensured the water and food dishes were within reach. By the early hours of morning, the wolf seemed stronger, though still weak. Its eyes opened slightly, focusing on him with a cautious but noticeable recognition. It was the first real acknowledgement of trust, a small connection that had taken a full day to establish. The mechanic smiled quietly to himself, realizing that this was just the beginning of a long journey. He understood that caring for the little wolf would take time, effort, and patience. There would be setbacks, moments of fear, and times when progress seemed impossible. But he also knew that the reward was worth every struggle. He had already seen the spark of life, determination and awareness in the wolf, and he felt a deep responsibility to nurture it. By sunrise, the mechanic allowed himself a brief moment of rest, keeping one eye on the wolf. The creature, sensing safety, curled up under the warm lamp and closed its eyes. For the first time, it seemed to relax completely. No trembling, no fear, just quiet rest. The mechanic leaned back in his chair and thought about the future. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he felt ready to face it. This tiny alien wolf had entered his life unexpectedly. But he knew it was not just an animal to save. It was a companion, a responsibility, and perhaps, in ways he didn't yet understand, a teacher. And so, the quiet workshop that had once been filled only with the sound of machines now held the soft presence of life. A fragile, tiny life that would shape the days to come in ways the mechanic could not yet imagine. The next few days were a turning point. The little alien wolf, once so weak and trembling, began to move with slightly more confidence. Its legs, still short and fragile, carried it across the soft blankets without collapsing as often. Each small step was a victory, and the mechanic watched every one with a quiet pride. He had expected recovery to be slow, but he hadn't imagined how much personality the creature already had. It started with small gestures. When he entered the workshop, the wolf would lift its head and tilt it, studying him with those bright, intelligent eyes. It seemed curious, as if trying to understand who he was and what his intentions might be. He spoke to it often, softly and gently, describing what he was doing while repairing engines or cleaning tools. At first, the wolf simply listened, ears twitching and eyes alert. But slowly it began responding to him in its own way. One morning, he noticed it trying to mimic him. While he tightened a bolt on an old engine, the wolf nudged a small piece of scrap metal with its nose, pushing it along the floor. It wasn't the same as what he did, but the effort was clear. The mechanic chuckled softly. He hadn't expected it to pay attention to his work, much less try to imitate it. "Careful now," he said, though mostly to keep it from knocking over something dangerous. Meals became a bonding ritual. He would prepare soft, easy-to-eat food and place it carefully in a shallow dish. At first, the wolf ate slowly, hesitant, but now it would almost run to the dish when it smelled the food. He noticed small quirks in its behavior. Sometimes it would sniff around the workshop for hidden treats. Sometimes it would paw at a tool that fascinated it. Each day it learned more, and each day he marveled at its intelligence. The mechanic began to adjust his daily routine around the creature. He made sure there were no sharp edges or heavy tools lying around. He patted corners with cloth and moved clutter to safer areas. Every precaution was for the wolf, and over time, the creature began to recognize the workshop as its safe space. It no longer flinched at his movements or the hum of machines. Instead, it would often follow him around, staying close as he worked. Their bond grew quietly but steadily. The wolf would curl up beside him during breaks, resting its small head on his knee. When he talked, it would look up, ears tilted, as if listening carefully. Occasionally, it would nudge his hand or brush against him with its tiny body, a simple gesture that spoke volumes of trust and companionship. The mechanic found himself talking more than ever before, explaining things he usually kept to himself. Somehow, this fragile creature had opened a part of him he hadn't realized existed. Play became part of their day. The mechanic would roll small pieces of scrap metal across the floor, and the wolf would chase them, stumbling, tripping, but always determined. Its short legs didn't stop it from trying again and again. He laughed more in those moments than he had in months. Watching it, he could see a spark of joy that had been missing from both of their lives. The wolf also began to recognize his routines. When he prepared food, it would wait patiently near the enclosure. When he started a machine, it would sit back and watch attentively, as though fascinated by the moving parts and sounds. The mechanic noticed that the wolf's curiosity wasn't just instinct, it was intelligence. It remembered small details and seemed to understand cause and effect. If he left a tool on the floor, the wolf would paw at it in a way that suggested it wanted to help or investigate. Over time, he introduced small tasks. He would leave tiny screws or bolts near the edge of the table, and the wolf would nudge them back into place. It wasn't perfect, but the effort was impressive. Sometimes it even watched him for long periods, studying his hands and movements. The mechanic realized that this little creature, once weak and struggling to survive, was capable of learning far faster than he had expected. They shared quiet moments, too. Some evenings, after the workshop lights were dimmed and machines silenced, the wolf would curl up on a blanket near him. He would speak softly about nothing in particular, describing the sky outside, the quiet of the trade route, and stories of his past. The wolf would listen, occasionally shifting its tiny body closer. In these moments, words weren't necessary. The connection was in the shared presence, in the trust that had been built through care and patience. The mechanic also began noticing subtle changes in its behavior. It started responding to simple commands. When he pointed to a spot on the floor, it would move there. When he made a motion to lift something, it would mimic him, even if clumsily. These small signs of understanding filled him with awe. A creature so small and weak had grown to interact with him in a way that felt almost human in its intelligence and attentiveness. Sometimes, the wolf would become frustrated. Its small legs would fail it during a chase, or when trying to climb a surface. It would let out a quiet whine, and the mechanic would respond by scooping it up and speaking gently. "It's okay," he would whisper. "You're learning. You're trying. And that's what matters." These moments strengthened their bond. The wolf began to trust him not just for survival, but for comfort and guidance. The mechanic also discovered something surprising. The wolf had a sense of timing. It seemed to know when he would take breaks, when he would start work, and even when he would prepare food. Its small head would peek from its enclosure at precise moments, eyes bright and alert. He realized it was observing, learning patterns, and adjusting its behavior accordingly. It was not just following him, it was understanding him. Word of the tiny wolf slowly spread among travelers who passed the workshop. Some came out of curiosity, peeking at the small creature that moved with intelligence beyond its size. The mechanic was protective, showing it only when necessary and always keeping it safe. Visitors were amazed, but he was more focused on keeping the wolf comfortable and stress-free. He had learned that trust, once built, could be fragile, and he didn't want to risk breaking it by the end of the week. The wolf had changed dramatically. It could move more steadily, respond to simple commands, and show affection in its own ways. The mechanic realized that what had started as a rescue had turned into something much deeper. He was not just caring for a weak creature. He was building a partnership, a quiet companionship that would shape both their lives. He often thought back to the moment he found it behind the scrap pile. How fragile and helpless it had seemed. Now it was playful, curious, and increasingly confident. Each day, it surprised him with new gestures, small acts of intelligence, and subtle expressions of trust. He marveled at its resilience. A life that seemed doomed had begun to flourish, not in isolation, but through care, patience, and connection. Even the smallest challenges became lessons. He learned to read its expressions when it was tired, when it was curious, and when it wanted attention. He adjusted his own behavior, becoming more patient, observant, and thoughtful. Caring for the wolf was changing him as much as it was helping the creature. He felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced before, a quiet fulfillment in nurturing life that depended entirely on him. By the end of the third week, the wolf was no longer just a fragile survivor. It had personality, intelligence, and affection. It followed him around the workshop, helped in small ways, and showed signs of understanding more complex tasks. The mechanic realized that the bond they had built was rare, formed through trust, patience, and shared experiences. The tiny alien wolf, once struggling to survive, had become a companion, a student, and a friend. And though the mechanic didn't yet know what the future held, he felt ready for it. They had both changed. The wolf had grown stronger, not just in body but in spirit. He had grown more patient, compassionate, and connected. Together, they were learning how to navigate a life neither had expected, but both now embraced. The workshop, once silent and solitary, was now filled with small movements, curious sounds, and the quiet, watchful presence of a tiny creature that had become more than a responsibility. It had become family. Life in the workshop had settled into a quiet rhythm, but it was far from ordinary. The little alien wolf had grown stronger, moving with more confidence each day, and its intelligence continued to surprise the mechanic. He had come to rely on it not just as a companion, but as a little helper, though he knew it was still small and fragile. He had learned to notice the tiniest signals, how it tilted its head when curious, how it pawed gently at a tool when it wanted to interact, or how it would nuzzle him when seeking comfort. One morning, a traveler arrived at the station. She introduced herself as a biologist who studied alien species, particularly rare or unusual creatures. She carried a small bag of instruments and a notebook, moving carefully through the workshop. When she noticed the tiny alien wolf watching from its enclosure, Her eyes widened. She crouched down to get a closer look, whispering in awe. The mechanic felt a little nervous. He was protective of the creature and didn't want it stressed by strangers. "It's safe," he said softly, though mostly to reassure himself as well as her. The biologist gently approached, careful not to make sudden movements. This is incredible," she said, her voice full of wonder. She explained that she had read about the species, known for being strong, fast, and extremely dangerous in its normal adult form. She paused, looking carefully at the wolf. "But this one, it's smaller than any documented case. And yet, it's alert, aware, intelligent." The mechanic watched her closely, noting both her fascination and her subtle caution. He knew people who studied alien creatures often wanted to take them for research, sometimes in ways that weren't gentle. He felt a protective instinct rise. "It's not for sale," he said quietly. "It's under my care." The biologist nodded, her expression softening slightly. "I understand. But you must know. Creatures like this are rare. People could be interested in taking it, whether for research or trade. Its dwarfism makes it vulnerable, but its mind, it's remarkable. You should be careful." Her warning lingered in the mechanic's mind long after she left. He realized that the wolf's intelligence, which had seemed like a delightful surprise, also made it a target. Others could see it as a specimen rather than a living being. He thought about how much he had already grown attached to it. He couldn't imagine anyone taking it away. Meanwhile, the wolf continued to explore the workshop with more confidence. It moved nimbly over small obstacles, though its legs were still short, and it was careful not to stumble. It began watching the mechanic work on machines with intense focus, tilting its head as though trying to understand each movement. Sometimes it even tried to mimic his actions, pushing small tools, nudging parts, or pawing at loose screws. The mechanic couldn't help but smile. Its curiosity and intelligence were extraordinary. He started to test it gently, giving it simple tasks like moving a bolt to a specific place or nudging a small part closer. Each time, the wolf attempted the task, learning from its mistakes, adjusting its movements, and gradually improving. The mechanic was amazed. The creature was not just observing. It was learning, understanding, and responding in ways that went beyond instinct. As the days passed, he noticed other subtle signs of intelligence. The wolf began to recognize routine activities, when he was about to start breakfast, when he would take a break, and even when he would clean his tools. It adjusted its behavior accordingly, sometimes sitting patiently, other times moving closer to help. The mechanic realized that the bond they had formed was deepening. The wolf was becoming more than a companion. It was a partner, an active presence in his life. One afternoon, the mechanic was working on a particularly stubborn engine. He had tried multiple repairs, but the parts still wouldn't align. The wolf, watching closely, suddenly nudged a small piece of scrap in just the right way. The mechanic paused, curious, and followed its motion. To his surprise, the alignment was correct. He laughed softly, shaking his head. "Well, I'll be. You've got an eye for this, haven't you?" The wolf's tail twitched, and it seemed pleased with the reaction. This moment made the mechanic realize something important. The wolf wasn't just intelligent in a general sense. It had specific skills that complemented his own work. Its small size allowed it to reach areas he couldn't, and its sharp eyes caught details he sometimes missed. The bond between them was evolving into something unique, a quiet partnership built on trust, observation, and shared effort. But with intelligence came responsibility. The mechanic knew that the wolf's abilities and awareness could attract attention. He remembered the biologist's warning and started thinking about ways to protect it. He reinforced the enclosure, added subtle barriers around the workshop, and limited access to the space. He didn't want to frighten the creature, but he wanted to be sure it was safe from anyone who might misunderstand or misuse it at night. When the workshop was quiet, the wolf often curled up near him, watching him as he cleaned tools or prepared for the next day. It had become attentive in a way that felt almost human, aware of his mood, responsive to his movements, and even comforting when he was tired or stressed. The mechanic often found himself talking to it, not out of necessity, but because its presence made him feel understood. It wasn't a human companion, but in its own way, it was just as significant. He began to notice how much the wolf observed the world beyond the workshop. When he opened the door to step outside, it would perk up its ears, following sounds of passing ships or distant voices. Its curiosity seemed endless, and the mechanic realized that it wanted to understand everything around it. He encouraged this curiosity safely, guiding it away from hazards while letting it explore small areas. The wolf also began to show affection in subtle ways. Sometimes it would nuzzle his hand when he sat nearby. Other times, it would paw at a cloth or blanket to bring it closer to him. These gestures were small, but they spoke volumes about the trust and bond between them. The mechanic felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years, a connection born not out of obligation, but mutual respect and care. Despite the calm, he knew challenges were coming. Others might hear about the wolf, or its abilities could draw unwanted attention. He began thinking strategically how to protect it while allowing it to thrive. The wolf had become too intelligent, too aware, to be hidden completely, but he couldn't risk exposing it to danger. The balance was delicate, and he was learning quickly how to maintain it. One afternoon, the wolf did something new. While he repaired a complex engine, it nudged a small lever, causing a panel to shift slightly. The mechanic looked closely and realized that the adjustment solved the problem he had struggled with for hours. He laughed softly, amazed. "You really are something else," he said. The wolf's eyes brightened, and its tail twitched as if it understood the praise. Moments like this strengthened their connection. The wolf was no longer just an observer. It was a participant, an assistant, and in many ways, a teacher. It showed the mechanic new perspectives, small insights, and clever ways to approach problems. Each day, he learned more about its intelligence, its curiosity, and its personality. The biologist's warning lingered in the back of his mind. He knew that the wolf's intelligence made it extraordinary, but also vulnerable. People might see it as rare or valuable, not as a living being. He had to be vigilant, careful, and protective. Yet he also knew that hiding it completely would deny it the stimulation it needed to grow and learn. The challenge was to find a balanced safety without isolation, guidance without restriction. By the end of the week, the mechanic had developed a clear routine. He worked on machines, guided the wolf in small tasks, provided meals, and ensured it had rest and warmth. In return, the wolf observed, learned, and assisted when possible. Its intelligence was evident, but so was its affection and trust. The mechanic often found himself marveling at the creature's growth, how far it had come from the tiny, trembling being he had first found behind the scrap pile. He realized that their relationship was no longer one-sided. The wolf had become an active participant in the workshop, a partner who contributed in small but meaningful ways. It was still fragile, still tiny, but its mind and awareness had grown, making it a remarkable companion. The mechanic understood that their journey was just beginning. Challenges would come, curiosity might attract attention, and dangers might arise. But together, they had formed a bond that could withstand much more than either of them had ever imagined. The little alien wolf had not only survived, it had thrived under care, attention, and respect. And in doing so, it had transformed the mechanic's quiet workshop into a place alive with curiosity, intelligence, and the quiet, undeniable presence of a life that mattered deeply. The days in the workshop had started to feel alive in a way the mechanic had never experienced before. The little alien wolf, once so weak and fragile, had grown stronger, more confident, and remarkably observant. Its intelligence had become obvious, but he was about to discover that its talents went far beyond what he had imagined. One afternoon, the mechanic was working on an old engine that had been giving him trouble for days. No matter how carefully he examined it, something was off. The pieces didn't fit together quite right, and the mechanism kept jamming. He sighed, leaning over the engine with frustration, wishing he had an extra pair of hands, or maybe even a sharper eye. The wolf, as usual, was nearby, watching intently. Its eyes followed every movement, its small head tilted in concentration. The mechanic thought it was simply curious, but then he noticed something unusual. The wolf nudged a small lever on the side of the engine. The lever moved just enough to shift a tiny part into place. He paused, squinting. Could it be a coincidence? He tried it again. As he adjusted the engine and stepped back, the wolf nudged another part, almost instinctively. To his amazement, the engine began to function smoothly. He couldn't believe it. This tiny creature, still struggling with its short legs and small size, had somehow identified the problem and helped fix it. The mechanic laughed softly, shaking his head in disbelief. "Well, I'll be. You've got an eye for this, don't you?" The wolf's tail twitched, as if it understood the praise, and it let out a soft, pleased sound. From that moment, he realized that the wolf's intelligence was not only observational, it was practical, precise and creative. Over the next few days, the mechanic began testing the wolf's abilities more deliberately. He would place small tools or parts in unusual positions to see how it would react. Each time, the wolf analyzed the situation, nudged, tapped, or moved objects with surprising accuracy. It was as if it had a natural instinct for mechanics, an understanding of how things worked that went beyond simple mimicry. Word of the wolf's abilities began to spread quietly among travelers who passed the workshop. Some came out of curiosity, peeking at the tiny creature working alongside the mechanic. They were amazed by how a small, fragile being could display such precision and intelligence. But the mechanic was cautious. He didn't want too much attention drawn to the wolf. It wasn't a tool to show off, it was a living companion, and he was determined to protect it. The wolf also began assisting in unexpected ways. Sometimes it would fetch small parts that the mechanic had misplaced or overlooked. Other times it would point by tapping with its nose or paw to tools or components that needed attention. It became a quiet partner in the workshop, alert and aware of the work around it. The mechanic had never imagined that a creature so small could be so helpful, so observant, and so perceptive. One day, a particularly complex engine arrived at the workshop. The mechanic had been struggling with it for hours, trying to align a series of intricate gears. Frustrated, he stepped back and muttered, "I wish someone could give me a hand with this." The wolf, as if understanding, climbed carefully onto the workbench and began observing the gears with intense focus. Minutes later, it nudged a gear with its nose, adjusting it slightly. The mechanic tried the mechanism, and to his amazement, it worked perfectly. He stared at the wolf, completely stunned. You did that?" he asked softly. The wolf blinked, ears twitching, tail wagging slightly. It had not just observed, it had understood the problem, and acted with precision. This moment changed everything for the mechanic. He began to rely on the wolf in subtle ways, giving it small tasks during his work. He was careful never to put it in danger, but he realized that its talents were extraordinary. The wolf could see things he missed, notice details that escaped him, and even solve simple mechanical problems independently. Their bond deepened with each passing day. The mechanic began to see the wolf not just as a rescued creature, but as a partner, a helper, and even a friend. He would talk to it as he worked, explaining what he was doing, giving gentle guidance, and praising it for small achievements. The wolf responded with gestures, nudges, taps, and soft sounds that seemed like acknowledgement. The mechanic also noticed the wolf's curiosity expanding beyond the workshop. It would watch ships pass by, listen to distant sounds, and observe visitors who came near. Its awareness was sharp, alert, and intelligent. It seemed to understand the basics of safety, avoiding areas that could be dangerous, and even anticipating his movements as he worked. One afternoon, a particularly difficult repair required him to reach a part deep inside a machine. He struggled to see clearly, moving slowly and carefully. The wolf, sensing the challenge, climbed onto a nearby platform and nudged a small lever that shifted the mechanism just enough for him to see. With the wolf's help, the repair was completed quickly and efficiently. He leaned back, smiling and laughing softly. "I can't believe how much you've learned," he said. The wolf's eyes sparkled with what seemed like pride, and its tail wagged lightly. Visitors who came to the workshop began to notice the unusual partnership. Some watched in awe as the mechanic and the tiny wolf worked together, moving parts, adjusting tools, and solving problems with surprising coordination. The wolf's reputation began to grow quietly, but the mechanic remained cautious. He knew that others might want to take the creature or exploit its intelligence, and he was determined to protect it at all costs. Despite its talents, the wolf remained fragile. Its legs were still short, its movements cautious, and it required careful handling. The mechanic never forced it to work or take risks. Every task was voluntary, every gesture guided with patience. He had learned that intelligence and strength were not enough. The wolf needed care, safety, and trust as much as it needed food and warmth. Evenings were now filled with a quiet routine. The wolf would rest near him, sometimes playing with small tools or parts, other times simply observing. He would speak to it softly, sharing thoughts about the day, the repairs, and the small victories they achieved together. The wolf seemed to listen attentively, tilting its head, shifting closer, or letting out small sounds that felt like acknowledgement. The mechanic often reflected on how much the creature had changed his life. It had started as a tiny, weak, trembling being, completely dependent on him for survival. Now it was confident, curious, intelligent, and an active participant in the workshop. He had not only saved a life, he had formed a partnership that enriched both their lives in ways he had never imagined. He also realized that the wolf's talents were extraordinary in a larger sense. If handled carelessly, it could have been exploited or taken by those who saw its intelligence as a commodity. But under his care, the wolf was learning, growing, and thriving safely. It was a balance of protection and encouragement, caution and freedom. One evening, after a long day of work, the mechanic sat quietly in the workshop. The wolf lay beside him, small body curled up, breathing steady and calm. He reached out and stroked its fur, marveling at how far it had come. From a weak, trembling creature behind a scrap pile to a confident, intelligent companion capable of assisting him in complex tasks. It was an incredible transformation. He knew the journey was not over. There would be challenges ahead. Curiosity might attract attention, and dangers could arise. But he felt confident that together they could face whatever came. The bond between them was strong, built on trust, patience, and mutual respect. As he looked at the little wolf, he realized something important. Its abilities were not just remarkable, they were a reminder of the unexpected ways life can surprise us. He had come to the workshop expecting a quiet, solitary existence. Instead, he had found a companion, a partner, and a teacher in a tiny, fragile being that had taught him about patience, intelligence, and the power of trust. The wolf stirred slightly, lifting its head and looking at him with bright, curious eyes. He smiled softly. "Ready for another day tomorrow?" he whispered. The wolf tilted its head, nudged a small tool toward him, and let out a tiny, happy sound dot in that moment. The mechanic understood that their partnership had become something rare and extraordinary. The tiny alien wolf, once so fragile and weak, was now a vital presence in his life. Its intelligence, curiosity, and growing talents had changed the workshop and him forever. The workshop, once quiet and lonely, was now filled with life, activity, and the quiet hum of shared work. The mechanic and the wolf had found a rhythm together, a balance of guidance and independence, challenge and support. It was a partnership built on trust, care, and the wonder of discovering unexpected talents in a creature no one else could understand. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. The little wolf had become far more than a companion. It had become a partner, a helper, and a friend capable of surprising anyone who crossed their path. The mechanic smiled, realizing that he had never expected to find such extraordinary talent in such a tiny, fragile being, and yet here it was, right beside him. The quiet rhythm of the workshop had grown into something extraordinary. The little alien wolf, once tiny and trembling, had grown into a creature of sharp intelligence, curiosity, and subtle strength. Every day it observed, learned, and assisted in ways that amazed the mechanic. Together, they had developed a rhythm, a partnership that was unspoken but unmistakable. Yet, life had a way of testing even the strongest bonds. One morning, as the mechanic opened the workshop door, he noticed unusual tracks leading toward the building. They were not from ordinary travelers or animals. These prints were precise and deliberate, as if someone had been watching for a while. A small unease settled over him. He knew that the wolf's intelligence and uniqueness could attract attention from those who wanted it for their own purposes. He glanced at the wolf, lying on its blanket, its eyes bright and alert. He silently vowed to protect it, no matter what. The day passed with routine tasks, but the mechanic remained vigilant. He adjusted the workshop's layout to create subtle barriers and clear escape paths for the wolf. The creature, sensing the tension, stayed close to him, its tiny body brushing against his leg as he moved. Their silent communication was strong. They both knew that something was different, that danger might be approaching, but also that they were not alone. Late in the afternoon, a vehicle arrived at the edge of the workshop. Two figures stepped out, moving cautiously, clearly searching for something. The mechanic's heart raced. He watched as they scanned the area, their eyes drawn to the small movements in the workshop. The wolf, alert and tense, crouched low, ears flattened. It had grown accustomed to the world, but it instinctively knew when a threat approached. The mechanic acted quickly. He closed the main door to the workshop, guiding the wolf to a secure enclosure he had prepared for emergencies. He whispered softly, calming the creature while keeping his movements precise. The wolf watched him, trusting his guidance completely. For the first time, the mechanic felt the weight of responsibility more acutely than ever. He could not allow this fragile, intelligent being to be taken. The intruders moved closer, unaware that the wolf was safely hidden. The mechanic had to think fast. He gathered tools and materials, setting up subtle distractions to buy time. The wolf, sensing his urgency, stayed quiet, its small body still, ears twitching with awareness. He watched the intruders carefully, noting their movements, and prepared to act if necessary. Hours passed in tense silence. The figures searched around the workshop, occasionally peering through windows and checking corners. The mechanic stayed, hidden, moving only when safe, constantly monitoring the wolf. He realized that protecting it required not only cleverness, but patience. Any rash move could put them both at risk. As night fell, the intruders finally left, muttering to each other about a mistake or false lead. The mechanic waited, ensuring they were gone before allowing the wolf to leave its enclosure. The creature emerged slowly, its small body tense but responsive to his presence. He knelt down, stroking its fur gently. "It's okay," he whispered. "They're gone. You're safe." The wolf pressed against him, a silent affirmation of trust. In the days that followed, the mechanic reinforced security measures throughout the workshop. He installed subtle barriers, created hidden spaces, and adjusted the layout to make it difficult for outsiders to see the wolf. At the same time, he continued their daily routine of care, play, and work. The wolf resumed its small tasks, observing and assisting in ways that never failed to amaze him. The danger had reminded him of the wolf's value, not in terms of trade or rarity, but in the deep bond they shared. It was not a creature to be possessed. It was a partner, a friend, and a life he had sworn to protect. The experience strengthened their connection, and the wolf seemed to understand the seriousness of the world around it more clearly than ever. Despite the threats, the wolf's confidence continued to grow. It moved through the workshop with purpose, engaging with tools and parts, observing the mechanic, and sometimes nudging items to assist him. Its intelligence was remarkable, but so was its awareness of the environment. It seemed to sense subtle changes, anticipate his actions, and even react to small problems before they became issues. The mechanic marveled at the wolf's abilities. He realized that he had not only saved a fragile life, but had also gained a partner who could contribute in ways he had never imagined. Its small size was no longer a limitation. Instead, it allowed it to reach areas he couldn't, notice tiny details, and act with precision. Together, they were stronger than either could have been alone. One afternoon, while working on a complex engine, the wolf demonstrated something new. It nudged a lever, adjusted a small component, and then tapped a button in a precise sequence. The engine roared to life perfectly. The mechanic froze, staring in awe. You did that," he whispered. The wolf looked up at him, ears alert, tail wagging slightly. It had learned not just by observation, but by understanding sequences, cause, and effect. From that moment, the mechanic began to rely on the wolf in new ways. He tested it gently, presenting challenges and observing how it solved problems. The wolf responded with intelligence, creativity, and patience. It was more than a helper, was a thinker, a partner, and a friend whose insights made life in the workshop smoother, more productive, and more meaningful. Despite the daily successes, the mechanic never let his guard down. The world outside the workshop was unpredictable, and he knew that threats could return. He reinforced security measures, created hidden passages, and taught the wolf small routines to stay safe if danger appeared. The creature adapted quickly, understanding the subtle cues and following his guidance without hesitation. Evenings became times of reflection and quiet connection. The mechanic would sit, speaking softly about the day, his thoughts and small observations, while the wolf rested nearby. It would occasionally nuzzle his hand, paw gently at his arm, or simply watch him with bright, intelligent eyes. These moments were filled with trust, understanding, and a deep sense of companionship. Over time, the mechanic realized that saving the wolf had changed him as much as it had changed the creature. He had become more patient, observant, and attentive. He had learned to communicate without words, to read subtle cues, and to value trust and care above all else. The workshop had transformed from a quiet, solitary place into a space of life, learning, and partnership. The wolf, once trembling and fragile, had become confident, intelligent, and aware. Its abilities continued to astonish him, from mechanical insights to environmental awareness. Yet, despite its talents, it remained vulnerable and small. The mechanic understood that protection, guidance, and trust were as vital as any skill. Their bond had become a balance of independence and care, challenge and safety, curiosity and restraint. One morning, as the first light of day spilled into the workshop, the wolf nudged a small tool toward him. Its eyes sparkled, and its tail twitched. The mechanic smiled, reaching down to stroke its fur. "Another day, huh?" he whispered. The wolf responded with a soft, happy sound, as if acknowledging the shared journey they had undertaken. He realized, in that quiet moment, that the little wolf was no longer just a rescued creature. It was a partner, a friend, and a presence that had reshaped his life. Its intelligence, curiosity, and growing abilities had brought new energy, purpose, and wonder to his daily routine. He had expected a quiet life of work and solitude, but instead he had found companionship, trust, and a remarkable bond. As days turned into weeks, the mechanic continued to teach, guide, and protect the wolf, while the creature continued to learn, explore, and assist. Their relationship was symbiotic. He provided care, safety, and guidance, and the wolf provided intelligence, companionship, and insight. Together, they faced challenges, solved problems, and created a small world of understanding, respect, and trust within the workshop. The threats that had once lurked outside were now just reminders of the importance of vigilance. The mechanic knew he would continue to protect the wolf from anyone who might see it as a commodity. But within the walls of the workshop, the wolf was free to learn, explore, and grow, and the mechanic was free to marvel at the incredible being he had saved. In the end, the tiny alien wolf, once weak and trembling, had survived against the odds. Its intelligence, courage, and resilience had transformed both its life and the mechanic's life. The bond they shared was unbreakable, built on trust, care, and the quiet, persistent understanding that each valued the other not for what it could do, but for who it was. The workshop, once quiet and solitary, was now alive with movement, curiosity, and intelligence. The mechanic and the wolf had created a small world together, a world of trust, partnership, and mutual respect. And though the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear. Together, they could face anything. The little alien wolf looked up at him with bright eyes, and the mechanic smiled. "We've come a long way," he whispered. The wolf nudged his hand, a small gesture of affection and acknowledgement. In that moment, the mechanic knew that their journey was only beginning, and that whatever came next, they would face it together, side by side.